September 19th, 1961. Roughly around 10:30 p.m., on a drive back home on US Route 3 near Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty and Barney Hill observed something strange in the sky. Coming home from a vacation in Niagra Falls, Betty Hill saw a point of light in the sky that moved below the moon and the planet Jupiter. At first, she thought it was a falling star, only it began to move upward and erratically, eventually growing bigger and bigger. Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look, and also to walk their dog Delcy. He stopped at a scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Betty, looking through with binoculars, observed an odd-shaped craft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon. Barney observed what he thought was a commercial airliner traveling toward Vermont on its way to Montreal. He quickly changed his mind as the craft rapidly descended in his direction. This made him realize that this object that was a plane was not a plane. They quickly returned to their car and drove toward Franconia Notch, a narrow mountainous stretch of the road. The Hills continued driving on the isolated road, moving slowly while observing the object as it came closer. At one point, the object passed above a restaurant and signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain, and came out near the Old Man of the Mountain. Betty stated that the object was about 40 feet long, and it seemed to be rotating. Roughly 1 mile south of Indian Head, the object rapidly descended toward their vehicle, causing him to stop in the middle of the highway. The craft hovered slightly about 80 to 100 feet above their vehicle and filled the entire field of view of the windshield. He stated it reminded him of a huge pancake. Pistol in hand, Barney left his vehicle and moved closer to the object. Viewing through the binoculars, he claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures, peering at him through the craft's windows in unison. One figure approached a panel that encircled the front portion of the craft. A voice came into his mind telling him to stay where you are and keep looking. Red lights suddenly appeared on the sides of the craft, followed by a long structure descending from the bottom. The craft approached him to within 50 to 80 feet. He immediately tore the binoculars away from his eyes and ran back to the car. In hysteria, he yelled, "They are going to capture us!" The craft was now above their vehicle. He accelerated away from the object while telling Betty to keep observing it. Almost immediately, they both heard a rhythmic series of beeping and buzzing sounds, the car vibrating and sending a tingling sensation throughout their bodies. What followed was an onset of an altered state of consciousness that dulled their minds. A second series of the sounds returned them to a conscious state. They found that they had traveled nearly 35 miles, but only had vague memories of the road. They recalled making a sudden, sharp, unplanned turn, encountered a roadblock, and observed a fiery orb in the road. On September 21st, Betty telephoned Peace Air Force Base to report the UFO encounter, though was hesitant to disclose all the details. On September 22nd, Major Paul W. Henderson telephoned the Hills for a more detailed interview. Henderson's report, dated September 26, determined that the Hills had probably misidentified planet Jupiter, but this was later changed to optical condition inversion and insufficient data. His report was forwarded to Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's UFO research project. Walter N. Webb, a Boston astronomer and NICAP member, met with the Hills on October 21, 1961. In a 6-hour interview, the Hills related all that they could remember of the UFO encounter. Barney described in detail all that he could remember about the craft and the appearance of the somehow not human figures aboard the craft. Webb stated, quote, "They were telling the truth, and the incident probably occurred exactly as reported, except for some minor uncertainties and technicalities that must be tolerated in any such observation where human judgment is involved. That is, exact time and length of visibility, apparent sizes of object and occupants, distance and height of object, etc." 10 days after the event, Betty had a series of vivid dreams that continued for 5 consecutive nights. Never had she recalled such dreams in such detail and intensity. After the 5 nights, they stopped abruptly. In November of 1961, she began to write down the details of her dreams. She recalls encountering a roadblock with men surrounding the car. She was then forced by 2 men to walk into the forest at night. Barney followed close behind but was in a trance-like state akin to sleepwalking. The men were about 5 feet 4 inches, and wore matching blue uniforms. They appeared human-like, with black hair and dark eyes, with a grayish color of skin. They were guided up a ramp to a disc-shaped metallic craft. Barney and Betty were separated into different rooms. Betty recalls speaking to a new man she called the Examiner, who spoke in English but was hard to understand. The examiner conducted tests on Betty while a bright light was shone on her. He examined her eyes, ears, mouth, teeth, throat, and hands, and cut off a lock of her hair. He saved trimmings of her fingernails and scraped off some of her skin with a dull knife. A needle was then thrust into her navel, which caused her agonizing pain. Upon concluding, Betty asked where they had come from, and a man pulled out an instructional map dotted with stars. The men escorted the Hills back to the car, where they waited until the craft departed. Then promptly, the Hills resumed their drive.